Hello, everyone. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome you to this panel discussion on advancing teaching and learning post-pandemic. Today, we have with us a distinguished panel of education experts that we like to call exemplars, each of whom bring a wealth of knowledge and experience to the table. We all know that public education is a vital component of our society, shaping the future of our children and providing them with the skills and the knowledge they need to succeed in life. With the world changing at such an unprecedented pace, it is more important than ever to have experts who are here for the kids and can provide insights and guidance on advancing teaching and learning, especially now post-pandemic. It is my hope that you will come away with valuable insights and perspectives on the teaching and learning taking place in our nation's public schools, and that the conversation also inspires our viewers to join us in both celebrating and supporting our nation's public schools and the educators and so many others that are here for the kids each and every single day. It is now my distinct pleasure to introduce our first panel. Joining us today are Laura Mitchell. Laura is the Vice President of Advocacy for the Montgomery County Council PTA in Maryland and National PTA 2022 Shirley Igoe Advocate of the Year. Meredith Draughn is a school counselor at B. Everett Jordan Elementary School in Graham, North Carolina, and Meredith is the 2023 ASCA School Counselor of the Year. Michelle Elia is the Ohio Literacy Lead for the Ohio Department of Education Literacy Team and State Support Team. Liza Caraballo-Suarez is the President-elect of the National Association of Elementary School Principals Board of Directors. Liza is also the principal of the Magnet School of Architecture, Engineering, and Design, PS120 in New York City. And Dr. Suzan Harris is the principal of Henderson Middle School in Jackson, Georgia, and the National Association of Secondary School Principals, Georgia State Coordinator. Welcome, everyone. We're so glad you're here with us today. Laura, let's begin with you. What issues are you seeing that our students are facing now, and how can we help best reach them?
Thank you for that question. What I'm seeing are a lot of diamonds in the rough. And obviously we want them all to sparkle and shine beautifully, and they will, but they're also under a lot of pressure. We're coming out of a 2.5 year, well, 3 year now, adverse childhood event for most kids. And then they're back in school and they're hearing about how far behind they are, the learning loss. We got to catch up. We have to do this. And the social emotional connections, the learning of those social skills, it's all adding up to a lot of pressure for them. So we're seeing some mental health challenges, some substance use challenges where we can't meet those needs. And the best way to reach them are the conversations with them. So we're having groups in schools, we're having family forums in the communities in every area of our county, and really listening to them, being very purposeful about including them, not just to listen to us, but for us to listen to them, because they know what they need better than we do. So that's been our push.
I really love that, really being very intentional about hearing the student voice. Sometimes it's easy to think that we know what they need or want, and oftentimes are off the mark.
Exactly.
Well, Meredith, let's go to you next. From the school counselor perspective, what are you seeing, and how are school counselors supporting students today?
Yeah, in preparation for today, I was reflecting on not only what I have been seeing, but in true school counselor fashion, right, the potential why behind it, besides just the pandemic, because there are so many contributing factors that kind of fall under that umbrella. And so I think the word unprecedented was used a lot, and rightfully so. But I don't think it was just, the COVID-19 virus itself that was unprecedented, because if you think back to when you were a kid, I remember thinking that adults had all the answers, right? That they were in control and knew everything. And therefore, they were able to easily explain to me how the world worked. And so, of course, as you grow up, you realize that that is not at all true. But kids, especially those kids with many protective factors in their households, really believe that. And so in comparison to like 9/11 or something like that, certainly adults were shaken and it was a type of collective trauma, but we had living examples from people who had dealt with war or attacks before, and my parents and helping adults use them as examples of how we move forward and what is to come. And so in the context of the pandemic, that wasn't the case at all. This was really unprecedented for all involved. And the people that our students have always believed to be the guiding light, those teachers and coaches and parents, who had all the answers, they no longer did, right? And so that inherent trust has kind of been shaken, and that's been a big issue that we've seen. And so what I'm seeing in response to this is that kids are extremely wary and anxious of kind of what is to come, and all of these expectations on top of them, with that anxiousness underlying is a problem. Their existing trust and their kind of external locus of control has been broken. And while they know that they're helping adults in their lives certainly care for them and support them, we can no longer pretend to have all the answers. And since kids take their cues from adults, this is resulting in a lot of dysregulation, along with trust that is having to be regained and structure that is having to be rebuilt. So you are safe and you are loved, and we will work through this together, right? And I think school counselors specifically are leading the way in combating this and really getting kind of back to basics by helping students focus on things that they can control and setting goals around things like attitude and effort and responses to situations. We've been teaching how we can relearn to regulate our bodies and our emotions. We have always worked in this arena, but we're having to do this on a core level, right? Instead of a typical tier 2 or additional support level, because more students are being referred for these issues than ever before. So specifically, that might look like helping to put morning routines in place that rebuild culture and address things like chronic absenteeism, creating safe spots in our schools where students can disengage and take breaks from that sensory overload that can come in a school environment, and really spelling out what each day and moment is going to be like to kind of calm the anxiety of what is going to happen next, right? Those butterflies that are stuck in so many of those stomachs. So just like Laura said, allowing students to be a part of the rebuilding process of the system that was so abruptly disrupted has been crucial in the last few years.
That just, I think, rings so true. And thank you, Meredith. And as somebody who works at the American School Counselor Association, I agree that school counselors are really just right in that, helping do this work in schools. So thank you so much for everything you do. Let's turn to Michelle next. Michelle, we know literacy is such an important part of kids' education and their success in life. So what are you seeing right now in literacy education? What advances, what challenges as a result of the pandemic, or that have evolved as a result of it?
Well, I'll start with the challenges so I can end on a positive note with the advances. How's that? So when it comes to challenges, I think the biggest one is that even pre-pandemic, teachers are getting conflicting messages about what to do and the research behind how students learn to read. And so teachers are working really hard and doing the best they can, but they're relying on professional development providers, higher education institutions, publishers to share the best and most evidence-based practices in these materials in this professional learning in their coursework. And so sometimes they're getting conflicting messages about what they should be doing with students. The other challenge, especially post-pandemic, is that there's so many systems that need to be addressed to make the changes that are necessary to ensure all students learn to read. So as I think about systems, I'm thinking your system in terms of assessments, your system within multi-tiered system of supports. So what are the interventions being provided? The instructional pedagogy that's being utilized, which looks very different in elementary versus with adolescent literacy. So each of these systems has to be addressed, which means you need well-informed administrators who are very busy right now handling, as we heard from our other presenters, so many other things right now associated with post-pandemic learning. And we need them to be instructional leaders and ensure systems level change, while at the same time, just trying to keep these systems working in a post-pandemic school society. And so that, that is problematic, right? We know we have work to do. Our NAEP data has been static since before the pandemic. Our students were not achieving. We had, more than 60% of our learners were not proficient, 4th grade and 8th grade. So we weren't doing well pre-pandemic when it came to literacy, and now we're exacerbating that with, pandemic learning loss. So it's the Matthew effect in action. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer. But the good news is these advances, right? We now have multiple states that have initiatives that are modeling the work done in states such as Mississippi that are grounded in this evidence base that we call the science of reading, right? So we know that multiple states are taking action to address this, and that is really powerful for change and consistency. We also have this research base from neuroscience, cognitive psychology, linguistics, special education, and education. And it's been around a long time, but it hasn't always been translated into practice for educators. And now there's a wealth of resources doing just that, translating research to practice and making it easily accessible. Many not-for-profits, such as the Reading League, are really devoted to this work, making it easily accessible by educators. And in our state, for example, we are providing free professional learning. And we know the impact of professional learning with instructional materials is huge, right? So we're providing free professional learning for educators as well. And then we also know that there are other organizations such as EdReports that are vetting instructional materials. This helps with that systems level change by taking some of the burden off of districts so that they can, a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of analysis of materials has been done, and now districts can dive deeper into those materials and make some informed decisions. So there's a lot of good things happening that can hopefully advance. So we can hit that 95% of all students learning how to read, which is what we know is possible.
Oh, thank you so much, Michelle. Suzan, we're going to go to you next and want to hear about how principals are really keeping kids and students at the center and core of their work during these challenging times as we come back after the pandemic and as we're dealing with all these things that Michelle and Meredith and Laura have talked about. So what's keeping principals engaged with the kid-focused work? Oops, Suzan, you are muted, my friend.
Sorry about that. I
No
think
worries.
most principals had to re-examine their leadership philosophy. I do know that for me, I had to really learn how to rebalance instructional leadership with the hierarchy of needs, Maslow's hierarchy of need. Because what happened after COVID is that I cannot, with good conscience, come back to the building and say, hey guys, ABC 1, 2, 3, writing and reading and arithmetic, right? It was just not going to happen. So I had to figure out, how do I rebalance this thing that has been thrown off by the pandemic? So the needs that we noticed that were popping up a lot for our kids were love and belonging and esteem. You'd be surprised how many kids, because they were at home isolated, they did not feel like they belonged. So we had to figure out, how do we make our students feel like they belong when they come back to the building? Another thing we noticed was that we had to build structures within the school day to address social emotional learning. It was just not something that we could put to the side. It was not something that, back in the day we could say, well, you will learn that at home from your family. No, we're getting kids who needed to learn it from us within the building. So the research indicates that if we're going to do social emotional learning right within our building, we cannot just do it once a day or once a week. You remember back in the day, the character ed programs? No, the research shows that it needs to be within that day, the whole time, right? So our approach was to oversaturate our day with social emotional learning, because that's just what our students needed at the time. Well, they still need it. So we first began with professional learning, because what you don't want to do is assume that our teachers know how to meet the needs of our students on that level. Now, I'm just going to be honest with you, at the middle school level, You know, we don't sit with the little cards and teach kids how to behave and just how you be nice to someone and all of that. It's just not appropriate for a middle school, but we had to do it. We had to do it. Some of our kids went out of school in the 3rd grade, you know, and those are some very important years to learn social skills. So we had to take it back to the basics. So thankfully with the CARES Act fund, we were able to fund training with Capturing Kids' Hearts to get our teachers to learn how to reconnect with students, because that was just something that also needed to happen, peer-to-peer interaction and also adult-to-student interaction. We also had to address multiple angles of student, the whole child. We had to look at the character ed piece. And we also had to look at the social emotional learning components, because if we just address the social emotional learning components, then the kids would be missing the character building part of it. And so we couldn't decide which one we needed to not address. We had to address it all. So another thing that we had to do to keep students at the center of just what we do, we created opportunities for students to have positive interactions with peers and adults. So we have club days. We have, it's more embedded now in our everyday programming here at the school. So granted, most places had clubs and stuff, but now we have it embedded within the school day, so everybody gets to participate. And you'd be surprised how our kids are like, hey, are we having clubs today? Because they look forward to those social interactions with adults and with their peers. So we had to make sure that we put that in the school day. Another thing that we do is, it's called Caring Adults in the Building. I didn't create it, but as a teacher, we did it. Every single adult in this building has a small group of students that they mentor. And the whole point of it is to make sure that every student has a caring adult in this building who they can call on and say, hey, I'm going through so-and-so. So, and some of them are mine. You know, I have a group. If you look at my email, I have a filter where I have so many emails from students. Hey, I need to talk to you about so-and-so, or I feel like I'm being bullied, or guess what? I got new chickens. But just to have that interaction with an adult, it makes their day. You'd be surprised how having access to the principal of a school has made a lot of students' day. And that's another thing too I need to highlight is access. They have access to adults. They can email us. To get to the counselor is so easy now. All they have to do is do a request. So those are some of the things that we have done, but that's on the one side. At the end of the day, y'all, I'm still an instructional leader. So like I said, I had to rebalance everything. Kids are coming to us with gaps in their learning now. You know, there are gaps, especially in the area of math. If you miss a day of math, it will throw you off for the next thing that you have to learn, right? So can you imagine a whole year of not math up to the level that you used to have it when you're in the brick and mortar building? So having to do more professional learning with staff so that they can go back and make sure they have the skills to fill those gaps for students. So that's some of the work that we've been doing to rebalance and to make sure that students are at the core of everything that we do.
Oh my gosh, Suzanne, those are some amazing examples. And I really I'm intrigued by the oversaturation of social and emotional learning. You know, as somebody who works with school counselors across the country, clearly we know school counselors are involved in that work, but you absolutely highlighted that it's not siloed work. It's not just the school counselor. It has to be the whole school for it to be meaningful and have an impact. Is your whole team, your whole school on board? Did you have any resistance to this approach?
The only resistance we had was when we did not know how to do it. Once we had training in how to build relationships or how to help students with social awareness or self-awareness, once we've gotten the training, we hit the ground running right after that. So the teachers wanted to do it. It's just that they didn't have the skills. And now we have the skills. And our counselors have been essential to that process happening.
Oh, well, thank you. I am very pleased to hear that. Well, speaking of school counselors, Meredith, I have a question for you around mental health. You touched on it briefly, and we know that students can't learn when they do have mental health concerns and they do have these other things going on. And all of you have highlighted really this renormalization of what we all experience in the school day. What are you seeing in terms of students' mental health needs and concerns? And can you talk a little bit, just even from your perspective or what you know nationally, about how schools can really work together to support students and families who have needs around mental health issues?
Yeah, I think what I'm seeing most of all is an awareness, right, of mental health and the importance of it. I think for a while, school counselors have maybe felt like the Lone Ranger in the building of like, mental health is health, right? Just like with a school nurse, mental health is health, just as physical health is. And so we have seen the awareness of that increase dramatically. And with that, we have seen the increase of referrals, right? Because we're noticing those issues more often, and we're more aware of them. And parents are helping us look for those issues instead of the call coming from us. The call is coming from them, right? A referral to us. And so, like I said, we've seen a lot of kind of anxiousness, or, the fight or flight response. I think there's more to it than just that. There's also that freeze response, or the fawn response, which is just the surface level, right? The surface level content. I'm not having deep conversations with my child or my students. I'm not having those in-depth moments like I used to, and those moments of connection, and then the freeze, we hear, well, that student just doesn't want to do it, or they're lazy, right? Or they're apathetic, right? We go to that instead of, they are completely overwhelmed right now, and they're just shutting down, just like your computer does when it has too many tabs open, right? And so I think that we're seeing all of those different responses from children. And the important thing that I try to say in working together is the response from the adult is crucial. And so first of all, listening to understand of what are you really feeling, right? And then also taking a moment to see, is this normal in the context, right? Because I think there's a lot of our parents who, across the country, I'm hearing a lot of people who did not have teenagers pre-pandemic, right? And now they do have teenagers, and they're like, something is wrong. But in reality, that is a normal teenage response that you are, seeing and they are exhibiting. There are better ways to handle it, right, than some of the ways that we're doing that. So teaching appropriate adult responses to some of these, and that way we can really triage and recognize what is a true mental health concern. And that is important because the earlier that you can intervene and address those, the better the outcome. And we know this. And so triaging those kind of normal, typical responses, and then engaging in some of the more severe mental health things that we are seeing, whether that be the anxiousness of, I haven't known what's going to happen next for 3 years, and I don't know how to process that. So processing through that, I think more than anything, I always say the school counselor is the resource hub. So connecting students and parents to community resources that already exist to assist in these mental health issues is crucial, and having a large range of options to them, because what I've noticed in talking with some of my colleagues at the national level is that therapists or mental health resources are booked up. And so knowing, making those calls, helping kind of make some phone calls and reach out to people to see what does have an opening. Is it telehealth? Is it in person? How can we reduce some of those barriers that families are going to inevitably face when there's kind of a backlog in the system, right? Everything's opening back up. Everyone's going more in person. We're all tired of screens. And so some of those appointment books are full. So how can we work together as a partner to connect school, community, and home to get and meet the needs that are arising in our students?
Oh, thank you so much, Meredith. And you set this up beautifully. I'd love to bring Laura back. You're at one of the largest school districts in the country in Montgomery County. I'd love to hear a little more about how that family and school engagement process from what you see in Montgomery County, and are there some specific things that you really find are working, or there are lessons you've learned along the way since the pandemic?
Yeah, well, one of the things is finding a common cause, right? And unfortunately, that has turned out right now to be mental health and substance use prevention.
Yeah.
So that is bringing, we've had 2 forums in the past month, and we've had over 1,500 people engaging in each one of them.
Wow.
We're planning our next one for next month. It's just incredible because parents are afraid. We're seeing overdoses in school. We're seeing overdoses, fatal and non-fatal, in the community. It's everywhere. But we weren't really talking about it, right? Now we're talking about it and they're going, wait, what? What did I miss? So they want to hear about it. We're opening up our schools. We're inviting them in with all of our community partners, nonprofits, county agencies, faith-based communities, Parks and Rec. You name it, they're there. Everybody is in that building. So no matter what it is you need to help make those connections, we have it in a one-stop shop. And we're giving them Narcan training and Narcan kits so that they have it on hand to keep their students safe. But most parents are just afraid. They don't know anything about it. They don't know it exists to reverse. It's a drug to reverse an overdose. So when they hear this and they hear about students being lost to overdose and to death by suicide as well, they're afraid, and they're looking to us, community members and schools and PTAs, other parents who have experienced some of those things. I have personal experience with the substance use issues with my youngest son, and so they want to know, what do I do? I remember that moment. I figured it out. Like I remember 9/11. It's seared in my brain. I'll never forget it. And it's paralyzing, that shutting down that Meredith just talked about. And our kids are doing the same thing because they're seeing it in their friends. They don't know what to do. They don't want to tell on them. They don't want to get them in trouble, but they want to help them. They want them to get help. So helping them learn how to have those conversations, helping them learn how to adjust to where we are now, not where we wish we were, where we used to be, where we are right now, and how to help your child navigate that. That's where we're finding the common ground. And everybody wants to be a part of that because we're all feeling the stresses of not knowing what to do.
That finding that common ground is such a critical point and piece as we think about schools and districts and states. So thank you so much for that, Laura. Michelle, for a final question, you are at the state level. We've heard from school, we've heard from district, and given your very unique lens around literacy and literacy education, given what you've heard our other panelists talk about, I'm wondering your thoughts from your state lens and perspective, what literacy educators can do to help this work of really, how do we find our common ground? How do we support kiddos and school staff and families who are really this shared trauma we've all had?
Well, I think that there's a couple things. Number one, we're really lucky that this messaging around language and literacy is much more accessible to all families. Emily Hanford, reporters like Emily Hanford and Natalie Wexler have taken this information and packaged it in such a way that it's accessible for everyone. So a podcast like Sold a Story is available for all families and community members to understand evidence-based language and literacy practices. And why that's important is, I'm going to quote Dr. Steve Dykstra here for a second, and his work with helping students overcome trauma. And he said, when it comes to overcoming trauma, students need 3 pillars. They need language and literacy. They need a relationship with an adult they can trust, and they need a sense of safety. And we as a district and as districts and schools and as a state, we can ensure that our students get that language and literacy, which is so critical for overcoming this trauma. And like I said, we realize now that we can do better. There is a research base. We know how to access it. It is more accessible thanks to a lot of not-for-profit organizations like the Reading League, and thanks to this work by folks like Emily Hanford and Natalie Wexler. So we can access this, we can implement it in our classrooms and ensure our students have these pillars that are critical for overcoming trauma. We can be the relationship, and we can also give them that language and literacy that they need to be successful.
Oh, I love that, the idea of the pillars to overcome trauma. And this first panel, you all exemplified this so beautifully in terms of creating relationships, creating opportunities for senses of belonging, the languages literacy, and helping students feel safe. So thank you all so much for this lovely first panel. I appreciate all the insights you brought to us and all the work you do every day in schools and in districts and in states to help make those connections so our students can feel safe and feel that they belong so they can be successful. So we're going to move on to our next panel. And our next group of panelists, they are leaders and educators and principals who have each made significant contributions in their fields and their communities. Our first panelist is Kevin Dalton, the president of the Toledo Federation of Teachers in Ohio. Then we have Leslie Hu, the secretary of the United Educators of San Francisco in California. And then Carole G. Basile, she is the dean of the Arizona State University Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College. So Kevin, I would like to start with you and want to ask you about how are educators serving our kids and what do they need from your perspective in terms of support and resources?
Sure. Thanks for the question. And before I begin, happy Public Schools Week to everybody out there. I really appreciate the opportunity to celebrate our public schools. But, it's a great question. We've been talking about that here in Toledo. And, our students, our teachers are working tirelessly to serve our students. We heard from previous panelists talking about the multi-tiered support systems with MTSS and social emotional learning and all the things that we're doing for our students. But we have to talk about the teachers. We got to talk about the educators, the nurses, the paraprofessionals, all the people that are impacting our students. And I think one of the most important things that we have found here in Toledo and really across the state where we've worked with folks is that our educators need to know and feel comforted and supported, right? They need to know that it's okay to spend some time doing social emotional learning. You talked about that saturation earlier, as opposed to being solely focused on academics. Now is not the time to worry about that. We need to be worried about these students, emotionally, physically, and academically. And when those teachers feel that support, they are able to step back, focus on that, which obviously makes that classroom a lot better. The other thing that we've seen our educators experience is compassion fatigue. Forever, our educators have always internalized the successes and failures of their students, right? Maybe that's one of the deficiencies of educators. We love and we care so much. But one of the things that they're internalizing is, okay, if I'm a third grade teacher, I should expect Kevin Dalton to be learning at third grade, but they're not recognizing the fact they've missed 2 years of school, so that it's okay that they're not at the third grade. So when they're not performing at the level that they think they should be from previous years, they internalize that as a deficiency of their own, but it's really not. It is, it's a result of this pandemic. It's a result of all the things that have culminated to where we are today. And I think one of the most important things that we've done is we do a lot of our own professional development, and we've worked with our professional development presenters and providers, and we've carved out time from those PDs so teachers can talk and share those types of, have those opportunities to share that, and to know that it's okay that just because they're not teaching the multiplication facts by the end of second grade, that's not their fault. That's not where they need to be. You need to meet where the kids are at. So those are some of the things that we have done to help our educators, going above and beyond. We talk about the layering supports to students. We are layering the supports for our educators as well. Not only readjusting or finding that balance between the we heard Suzan talk about the balance between academics and social emotional learning and that thing. We're doing the same thing with our professional development, as well as our PD days, our waiver days throughout the school year, taking those opportunities to focus on the educators and making sure they're heard and their needs are being met, whether it's additional professional development or additional opportunity to get support in the classroom to help those students move forward.
Yeah, the educators, we know that because this was a shared trauma, we need to ensure that we're giving them the supports so that they can help our students. And that compassion fatigue, boy, that's a real thing. And we need to ensure that our educators have what they need so they can work with our kiddos. So thank you, Kevin, for all you're doing in Toledo to support that work. Leslie, I would like to turn to you next. And as a leader of a college of education, I'd be interested in knowing a bit more about what developments have you seen, either pre-pandemic or since the pandemic, that are really impacting teaching and student learning? And is there really something that's exciting you?
Yes, I'm not part of a teachers college. I'm the secretary of our teachers union, but that question is really relevant,
Yes.
Actually.
Thank you. I apologize for that. Yes.
Small beans, thank you.
I skipped right ahead.
Totally. And so, I mean, I think I want to echo sort of what Kevin said and what multiple other people have said, in that like educators are struggling right now. And they are still showing up in some of the most amazing and miraculous ways, right? Our educators are using all of their compassion, wisdom, energy to serve, young people in ways that have been completely imaginative and innovative. And one of those ways I've seen here in San Francisco is a school called Buena Vista Horace Mann K-8. And they were able to build these close and meaningful relationships and partnership with families, especially with working class families and people of color, to identify the number one issue they were facing, which was a lack of stable, affordable housing, which is an unusual kind of thing for schools to even tackle, right? But led by the company school coordinator there at that school, and the entire school community came together with families, with students, with the community to come together to host the only shelter on a school campus in the entire country to serve unhoused families with their stay over program. It is a true partnership and innovation that we have not seen, right? And the stay over program has served hundreds of families in the last 5 years, with over 90% of them going on to stable housing. And by utilizing this community school strategy, which is like a jargon, but I really urge you all to look up community schools. By utilizing this strategy, by having the systems where shared decision-making and listening are central on how to do school, that school community was able to address an issue facing families that were never thought possible within a school. Never, right? And so it's a really good example of sort of the innovation and imagination that educators and families and community can come up with if we work together. And we all know that public education is at a crisis point, right? We have crumbling buildings, book banning is all of a sudden making a comeback, the ongoing privatization efforts, and the active fight against teaching honest history, and the ongoing active exploitation of educators. And note, I'm purposely not saying an educator shortage, because there's not an educator shortage. It's actually active exploitation of educators. And so what do we need, right? Educators like us, we need to be respected with living wages, benefits, and reasonable workloads. Public education needs to address the very real dangers of privatization that is impacting districts across the country. Politicians need to stand up and change the fundamental way public education is funded, and laws need to be changed so where collective bargaining can happen in every city, every county, and every state, in order for these kind of innovative programs and ideas to actually serve our young people and families in this new kind of like era that we're living in. Thank you. I'm going to abruptly stop.
That was amazing, and I appreciate that. And that innovation, that community and school innovation project, I have never heard of anything like that, and that is truly a shining example of really thinking differently and not in a silo about how we work together to raise up and lift up everyone.
Yep.
Have you seen a
Absolutely.
difference and impact in your community, being able to make sure families and students have resources in terms of ultimate student, not just test scores or grades, but just in making sure kiddos are ready for life after they leave us?
Absolutely. I mean, I think utilizing a community school strategy as a framework, actually, where all those things that so many of the amazing panelists before me spoke about and probably after me will speak about, it's a framework which all of those things can flow from, right? We've seen tremendous gains academically, even for students with IEPs, our Black students, our working class immigrant families. All of those students have been able to gain academically, socially. They feel connected to a community that genuinely cares about them. We've also seen something that's been really critical, especially now, is that we have seen teacher turnover go down from extreme highs to extreme lows using this strategy, right? And it has proven to stabilize a lot of school communities, especially in this time. And so we've seen tremendous impact, especially all the impacts that a lot of the other panels were talking about through this community school strategy. But even more, just drilling down is like, how do we actually rethink how we do school? How do we shift that narrative of how we do school, how we fund school, and how do we set it up for success for our young people?
That's exactly right. And you set up our next panelist so beautifully. Carole Basile, who is a leader of a college of education. And so I'm wondering, Carole, what it is you're thinking about as you think about your college of education, about how are we going to impact our education system post-pandemic? Have you seen in some innovation like we heard about in San Francisco, or what might be the challenges and barriers that might get us from where we know we need to be?
So just to give you a sense of who we are, and Leslie, thank you, because you did set us up, and I'm sitting here going, oh my gosh, we need to talk. We are a college of about 8,000 students, and so we prepare educators, and I use that term purposefully because I think it's about all kinds of learning environments, right, at all kinds of levels. So we feel like, right, we can be a catalyst for thinking about the education workforce. We talk about, we can't get to the big W workforce that we all talk about, the businesses talk about, until we think differently about our own education workforce. And so as we've been looking at today's workforce, specifically the K-12 workforce, we see fewer people coming in, we see more people leaving. I agree with you. It is not about teacher shortage. It's about not having enough people who actually want to be teachers today. But even more of our teacher candidates, right, are burned out even before they start. So I always say there's two things we learned during the pandemic. One is people don't want to be isolated and people want flexibility. And when we look at the profession of teaching, it is both isolating and it is inflexible. So we have really started to put our flag in the sand to say two things. One is that we want to provide all students with deeper and personalized learning by building teams of educators with distributed expertise, and that we've got to find ways to empower educators by developing better ways to enter the profession, specialize, and advance. So we've got to think about this always as a sort of two-edged sword of good for kids and good for teachers. So ultimately, the question becomes, how do we professionalize the profession and get to equity at the same time? So we're working with school systems now across the country to really think about developing new models. And the community schools piece, Leslie, that you just talked about really fits into some of this beautifully. We talk about spicy level of these models, and community schools really in some ways, right, could help us to get there because there are more partners, more people that we're building around kids. And so these models have this premise to say, look, we've got a group of kids. Let's say we have 100 kids at a grade level. And instead of saying, all right, here's your 25 kids and your 25 kids and your 25 kids and your 25 kids. How do we, and all of those people, those four teachers, right, that we just handed these kids to have different levels of experience, different levels of expertise. How do we say, here's 100 kids at that grade level, and how do we bring those teachers together that have distributed expertise to actually serve those kids and to own all of those kids? So we have been pushing on all parts of the system. We've been building a platform for community educators so that they can develop the skills that they need. I think we need to put the public back in public education to a certain extent and make have them understand that there really are skills to this profession. We're changing teacher preparation to provide more flexibility, more modalities. We're making work that they're doing in schools count, right, to decrease time and cost, degree and certification. We're thinking about specialties for paraprofessionals but also specializations for certified professionals in and out of education. Because as we see demographics change, as we see needs change around refugee education and the kinds of things that everybody, you know, in the last panel talked about, all the kinds of concerns and challenges around mental health, we also know that we need to have on these teams expertise around so many things that are both in and out of education. So we look across ASU to find other things like counseling, digital media, Indigenous education, to start thinking about who learners are and how we build this workforce. We're building content around whole child design and how multiple meaningful relationships can actually mitigate stress and trauma for kids. Moving leaders, really thinking about moving them from instructional leaders to really thinking about them as systems leaders, because now you have team leads. Now we change that flat organization structure to actually having teams and team leads. Now we're thinking about how we provide that kind of professional development, technical assistance. I could go on and on about this, but it is really about a better way to recruit, to retain, and to build a new structure and working condition for teachers that actually works. We're talking about working, HR systems, right, that are challenging because they're all built for one teacher, one classroom models. So our responsibility as a College of Ed, right, with our partners, lots of partners here, AASA, AACTE, lots of learning first partners, is really to build what we are calling the next education workforce. And that is to continue to push the boundaries, to ensure that learners get who they need when they need them, that they're not dependent on that one teacher in that classroom, and that teachers, right, always a double-edged sword here, good for kids, good for teachers. Teachers also have opportunities to grow, and that they have a job that is satisfying, and that both kids and teachers have a team.
That notion of good for kids, good for teachers is such a critical one. And as you spoke, I mean, everything you talked about was a systems approach, a systems process, the idea of the teams of educators with that distributed work. Certainly for some are very comfortable being the one teacher, the one classroom. For some, it would be a mindset shift. I'm wondering if you, as you push and work on this issue, in terms of the students who are in your College of Education, how they receive these ideas about this new way of approaching how to be an educator, and if have you experienced any resistance from folks who are in the field, have been in the field a long time, about how this work needs to move forward?
I think it's interesting that you move with who you can move with, right? You go with the willing here, right? Change Management 101. And so, we've seen our students, those students who really understand, they kind of get their head around this. They want to work on a team. We've got teachers in schools now that want to work on teams. They see this as valuable. And it's always interesting. We have a school that kind of starts, right? One school, I would say one school, one leader, one team, just start there. And we've seen schools by the second year, everybody's on a team because everybody looks in and says, oh my gosh, I want to work that way too. And as you say, Joe, I mean, there certainly are people who, they want to just be in their classroom with their kids. They want to do what they want to do. That's fine. But I just think that there's so much more to this and so much more value. And the research that we're seeing right now on this is that those who are in teams versus those who are not, job satisfaction is higher. We're seeing movement around kids. We've got a high school that, is moving kids ninth grade. They put all these kids on teams. They move these kids from completion, right, of their big four classes from in the 60s to in the 80s. Because now they're building teams around kids. It's huge, right? And so we're seeing change. We're seeing outcomes for both kids and teachers in these schools that are now moving towards these models. I mean, there's always going to be people that, worry about whatever they worry about. But I think, all of us, right, we all build teams for our kids. And so why shouldn't that be happening in school as well as out of school? So we make sure our kids get who they need when they need it. And we should be thinking about how to build schools that actually help kids to do that. But that also helps teachers. They don't have to know, it is impossible. The job is not possible today to know everything that you need to know to support every single one of those kids in your classroom with all that they need. And we heard that in the last panel. All the things that kids are coming in with, This job is untenable today. It has to change, and people are going to have to think about how they share expertise, how we distribute expertise, so that we actually can serve kids in a better way.
That is so incredibly powerful and true. And I really am looking forward to hearing some of the outcomes of the work you're doing and more of the evidence and the data and the research around that. So you can be really a shine a light for others around the country. So thank you for the work you're doing. Kevin, I'd like to go back to you, given what you've heard from Leslie and Carole. Would love to hear a little more in Toledo about if you could share some examples of maybe some of the community school work that's going on in your area, or any innovations. You mentioned a few things, but any innovations around providing support for all the educators in your district.
Sure, absolutely. So we've been working very closely with our district to develop, I guess, hubs of schools. Some people call them community schools, hubs. We're doing a lot of that. All of our high schools at this point, we've worked and created partnerships with our healthcare providers, and we all have, every school has a health clinic in there, not only accessible to the students, but accessible to the staff. Along with the staff, we want to make sure the students' needs are being met. Along for the staff, we worked with our above and beyond what would be a traditional employee assistance program, but we worked with a group of mental health providers, and that were really experts in education. So that way our people could pick up the phone and call someone and talk about some of the issues they're having, some of the trauma as educators. We kind of mirrored that after what the safety force workers do within the state of Ohio. That way, a lot of it, one, we wanted to make sure people had access to that type of support for our folks, as well as the same that we're doing for the kids. So those are some of the innovative things we've done there, as well as we are currently working on a student success center along with the Citizens Success Campus. And what we're finding is there's a lot of what you guys talked about, students, you heard, like, there's a lot of things happening in our kids' lives, and our classrooms cannot hold it all. Not every kid is going to be in special education, and they don't need to be. Not every kid is going to, require all the supports, but what's happening is they need something. In our classrooms, 97% of our kids are making, the appropriate choices every day. We got 3 to 3.5%, struggling with certain decisions. So what we need is an alternative, like a school for those places, for those kids to go to, that can have purposeful supports and resources. We have a litany of organizations with all good intentions, but at the end of the day, they're not clinicians, they're not true counselors, they're not the mental health experts that we need working with our families and kids. So we're working for a place for those students to get to, because it's not only about helping the kid, but it's also about helping their families. We know that these individuals are minors, they're kids, they're not ultimately making the end decision. So we got to figure out how we get them the help and also extend that help to their families, so we can get them to help their kids. And that's part of that Citizen Success Campus that we're working on creating. We're working with our Congresswoman, as well as some state legislators and county commissioners, as well as the juvenile justice system, because we're watching those students making these decisions in and outside the school. And at the end of the day, we know whatever happens outside the school is going to end up in our hallways, and we have to pay attention to all that and bring those resources and all of our leverage on behalf of them to bear.
Yeah, leveraging the collective resources is so important. And I continue to hear the theme from all of you. This is not siloed work. And for schools we're a team. The schools, the families, the communities, the agencies, the community workforce, we all need to be part of ensuring that we provide our students with the best education and the best supports. And I love the idea you talked about with the Student Success Center and the Citizen Success Campus. I'm looking forward to hearing more about that as you continue to build that program. Well, Kevin and Leslie and Carole, thank you so much for sharing about these amazing things going on in your schools of education, in your districts in California and Ohio. We appreciate all you do for your districts and your students. And it's so exciting to hear about these innovative programs. So we're going to go on to our final panel for the day. And our next group of panelists, they hold leadership roles in education. And like all of our previous panelists, are ardent supporters of public education and place student success at the heart and core and center of all they do. Kelly May-Vollmar is the Superintendent of Desert Sands Unified School District in La Quinta, California. David Schuler is the Executive Director of the School Superintendents Association, AASA. Julia Burgos is the Chief of School and Community Relations for Alexandria City Public Schools in Virginia. And Kristi Swett is the President-elect of the National School Boards Association and is also a school board member in Salt Lake City School District in Utah. So the question I really want all the panelists to ponder is, how are administrators doing things differently since the pandemic to reach and engage with the community? We've heard some beautiful examples already, but would love to hear from you all as well about things you're doing differently in your districts or what you're seeing nationally to engage with families in the community. So Kelly, I would love to start with you with that question.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. And thank you so much for having me here today. It's been great to hear all the amazing things that are happening in public education all over the nation, and so appropriate to highlight those this week. You know, I will tell you, and I'm not sharing with anyone viewing anything that they don't already know, but the pandemic did almost nothing to really bring us together. I mean, we've heard a lot of people talking about community schools and working as a team and not working in silos. And certainly the pandemic at the height of it really did silo us and separate us. And so we have a district in Southern California, about 27,000 students, which is a good size, but we've always been a very connected community. And we found coming out of COVID that that was not the case, that relationships had been fractured because of the stress of the pandemic. You have students, as we've already heard about, that felt isolated and not connected to school, not connected to adults. We had adults not feeling connected to students or adults. The community didn't feel connected. I mean, I think a lot about, you know, the kindergartner that started during the pandemic, and some of our campuses were limited to who could come on, right, because of trying to keep people safe. And so we had parents that were dropping off their students for the first time to go into classrooms they'd never seen before. So talk about feeling disconnected and not a part of what's going on. So we launched, as we started this school year, we launched a campaign called Reconnecting. Listen, learn, grow together. And we have spent the better part of this year with very intentional practices working to bring everyone back together. And we did that through a variety of listen and learn campaigns. We have 34 school sites. I went to every single school site this year and sat in the lunch area with the staff for 2 to 3 hours at a time, just listening to them. And so we've heard, you know, the stress that our educators are under. And so to be able to just spend time with them and listen to them and talk to them and help figure out how we can help them was time so well spent. We also had coffee events where historically we've had them at coffee shops. We moved them to school sites because that's where the parents are. And we wanted to be able to talk with them and meet with them. We've sent out surveys for people to give us their feedback. You know, obviously that's so important. And we've also tried to highlight and connect our district with 34 schools. They're not all connected to one another. So we moved to a lot of video messaging where we're showing scenes at different sites and highlighting different things that are happening, in addition to highlighting our people that work behind the scenes. And so we have a front and center campaign where we highlight our custodians and the work they do across the district. We highlight our transportation department, that everybody knows that they're there, but they don't really know very much about them. And so we've put those videos out. We do them once a month, and we do a big release. It's really fun, and open up a big area at the district office if people want to come watch it and serve popcorn. It's like a movie reveal, if you will. But we've just spent so much time trying to bring people back together. I spend the first hour of every principals meeting. We meet once a month, and it's just me and the principals. And we just talk about how can I support them? What do they need? Because they felt disconnected. So reconnecting, listening, learning, growing together has been so much of what we've focused on this year, and it's made all the difference in the world.
Yeah, I think that listening aspect has been a theme throughout our time together today. And I really appreciate the fact you, as a superintendent, went to the schools, sat down in those cafeterias, which for some can be a rather daunting task to listen, because that's when you do that. That is when you feel valued, that your voice matters, that your voice is heard. And I really love the idea of that front and center campaign. We know it does take a village in our school districts. There's so many people involved with the education process. So I really appreciate the fact that you're highlighting everyone involved in the work of a school and of a district. I am sure that is so appreciated. Thank you for doing that. All right, well, let's go on to David, who is at the School Superintendents Association. And welcome to AASA. David, how are you seeing administrators reaching out and responding to their communities?
Yeah, thanks, Jill. I think, what we just heard from Kelly is exactly what's happening with our colleagues across the country, that coming out of COVID, our superintendents and our principals are really being much more intentional and strategic about creating those opportunities for connecting with the entire school community. And I think, one of the things we learned in my former district was that we needed to provide support to our parents on how to support their students, and so it really became everybody in our community was a learner that we had to engage with from a stakeholder perspective. And I see that all over the country. And it's very different, and so going out to them rather than having just them come to us, and so we've got districts that set up, tech support camps in parks and in mobile home parks to provide support. And people just come on a Saturday with we were an iPad district, and ask the tech people to help support them. And that's what we have to do now. It's different, right? And, set time aside from not just an academic interventionist perspective, but from an attendance perspective, right? Because we had students that weren't coming to school in a lot of places for, 2 years or a year and a half. And so, we have people now that, get on a multifunction school activity bus and drive to apartments and drive to houses to get kids up and get them to come to school. And that's part of the new reality. And I think it just shows the commitment of our staff and our schools to ensuring that every student really knows that we care about them and that they belong and that they feel safe, right? And then I think, just a few other things that people haven't talked about. We're seeing a lot more districts doing social media campaigns. So a see something, say something campaign for students to make sure that, hey, if you see something online that's not appropriate, this is exactly what you do to make sure everybody stays safe. And I think that's really cool. I think for educators and leaders to be providing lessons on how to be good digital citizens in addition to the academic and the social emotional. And I think, the other piece that I would just add at this point is the importance of highlighting partners. Like, we have a lot of community partners that help schools do what they do for kids, and we need to celebrate them, so more and more school boards and districts, are highlighting a community partner at least once a month at a meeting, in addition to Kelly's idea of highlighting a staff member. We called it an everyday hero campaign because I love branding things, but in addition to that, we always did a community spotlight at a board meeting the last year and a half or so to thank people, because it is extra work to partner with schools. And there's a vested interest, obviously, from that business partner, to ensure they have a talent pipeline and that, where they live and work and have their business that has high quality public schools. But I think it's that return on investment we have to think about a little differently. And I think our school leaders really are thinking about very differently of how we do engage all stakeholders in a way that benefits and lifts everybody up to benefit that entire school community.
Absolutely. Lifting up to benefit the whole school community. I appreciated your bringing up about the digital piece of this. We hadn't touched on that. And, as we know, during the pandemic, devices were the social interaction that kids had, and that social media relationship that students had with their devices and with social media, took on a whole new level. And so, that came ensuring that our kids know how to be a good digital citizen and what to do when they have concerns, and educating staff and families is just so critical. I'm wondering, can you talk a little bit about, in your district where you were previously, the specifics about what that looked like and how that work happened?
Yeah, so we literally ran a see something, say something campaign at least once a year. We also have hashtags up in all of our bathrooms and in our hallways and above all water fountains, where if somebody wants to report something that either they see, they saw, they heard, they saw online, they can just take a quick picture of that hashtag and it'll take them directly to a link that they could then fill a form out and let somebody in our division head for student success, safety, and wellness. Used to be called the dean or assistant principal, but I just said I like to brand stuff. So we call them division heads for student success, safety, and wellness. So that person could immediately engage if there's somebody who needed help or if there was a situation that needed to be resolved. So I think that was really helpful for us and has been really helpful for us in our school community. And then if I could add one other thing, I would say, please, everybody should consider looking at, higher ed partnerships too. We've got amazing partnerships with 6 higher ed institutions in my former district. Carole and ASU is amazing. If anybody has not looked at their Global Freshman Academy, it is the way to go. It's a great opportunity for kids from an online perspective. And I just think we have to continue to get to yes on partnerships and engagement strategies that are going to benefit our students.
I agree completely. And I am sure that Carole is going to have a lot of emails come her way after this webinar today about how they can glean from her work she's doing. Thank you so much, David. I'm going to turn now to Julia, who is in my neck of the woods in Alexandria, Virginia. And Julia, I'd love to hear from you about your work in Alexandria City Schools and in terms of community relations and community engagement. What have you seen since the pandemic, and what have you learned from the process since the pandemic?
Thank you, Jill. And I would be remiss if I didn't also talk a little bit about my other hat as the Vice President at Large for National School Public Relations Association. So I'm also, pinch hitting and for both organizations today. So I'll talk a little bit about that too. But the organization created this engagement opportunity for a board member so that we could continue this work around engagement across the country. So I just wanted to mention that as well. But I'll talk a little bit about our work in Alexandria City Public Schools. I think one of the things that we learned was that our demographics are ever changing. This is not anything that no one knows, but school districts across the country are consistently pivoting to meet the needs of all these families that are coming in. We embrace diversity in a big way at ACPS, and we must be equipped to communicate with our families in many languages. Most recently, we welcomed many families from Afghanistan at ACPS and have supported these new members of our community by adding Dari as a 5th language when we translate all documents. So, I strongly believe that all families should receive information from the school division at the same time, and we work to translate all of our communications into the 5 most popular languages at ACPS. But you can imagine that was very difficult during the pandemic because we had lots of messages going out, COVID notifications, issues that we were trying to resolve, surveys, just so many different types of documents that we were trying to provide to families. And this became really difficult. And while this presents challenges, our commitment to equity drives this belief, and we work through it. So one of the things that I was committed to is making sure that all communications went out at the same time. Wasn't always very popular because then folks would say, well, we're not doing it fast enough. And of course, it takes time to translate. And so that was something that, I had to explain and get people to get on board with. But what was very important was that the schools were not getting bombarded with tons of messages. Oh, I received this message in English. I don't know what this means. I don't know what you're trying to say. Then the schools would get lots of calls, a lot of things lost in translation. And this avoided some of that as well and didn't put the schools on the spot. So we have shifted to that, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. And also, as I mentioned, as an NSBA executive board member, it provides me with a unique opportunity to share promising practices on communicating with diverse audiences and the nuances that present themselves to ensure that all families feel heard and can understand messages. We're always having to look at words that we're using and making sure that when they translate correctly. I'll give you an example. We have an equity climate survey that we do every year, and we always have to change the word climate. It just doesn't work. Most people don't understand that in another language. And it's just a simple example of how that is something we have to nuance when we're translating into other languages. Additionally, our team at ACPS has developed a 4-year strategic communications and community engagement plan for our division. And I have also shared that this past year when I was at the NSBA annual summit. And that's really important because our NSBA PR colleagues need to see how that roadmap helps them communicate better and make sure that they stay on message and that the school division understands the work that they're doing. And in our case, we fashioned our communications plan to support our strategic goal of family and community engagement. And our ACPS strategic plan is called Equity for All. And so it really ties in with that. And we made sure that our plan was very connected to that. Also in November, we were excited at ACPS to officially open our Family and Community Engagement Center, which is very unique to the Northern Virginia area. The opening had been delayed due to the pandemic, so to officially open it to the community, even though our staff had been working in that center. So we've actually had the official opening back in November. It was really exciting. We also have 4 division-wide bilingual family liaisons. 2 who speak Spanish, 1 who speaks Amharic, and 1 who is Arabic speaking. So they are able to navigate and work with those families that are coming into the area. We're also looking to add a Dari speaking liaison to assist our families from Afghanistan, which are really growing in number. We also launched a new communication system, a new mass communication system called Parent Square. Why that was important, it allows us to communicate with families in their preferred language, and it fosters that two-way engagement with families and teachers. That was a huge lift for us to create that, to get that system to work with our system. But why it's great is that the platform translates into over 100 languages. So now when a teacher sends a message to a family member, that family member speaks Dari, for instance, they will get the message in Dari. And when that family member writes back to the teacher gets it in English. So it has really created such a great form of two-way communication and has really limited that language barrier. And we're looking at analytics and seeing how much involvement our families have. The other thing too is that we're meeting families where they are at pop-up events and community locations to share vital information and assist them to navigate the school division. And then I think the other thing that a lot of people forget, we're also engaging our staff as our most valuable ambassadors, right? During the pandemic, we created a new position for an internal communication specialist. Oftentimes, the staff are the last to hear about things or feel connected. So we've had to reimagine how we engage our staff in a different way. I'll give you an example. We just actually closed our equity climate survey that I just talked about. Many of them did not know what that meant, the climate word. Many of our staff are not school-based or even office-based. Our bus drivers, our nutrition staff, our custodians, our engineers, they were not engaging. They don't check their email every day. So my team and we went out and actually met with the bus drivers and met with the nutrition team and met with all those different groups so we could hear from those skills. Because our staff are one of our most valuable voices in the community, right? And so we've had to also reimagine how we engage the staff to really help us carry messages and really create that community relations model. Our bus drivers are the first to see families in the day. They should be engaging with families on a regular basis, but we have to work with them and make sure that they see that and they understand that they are such a vital component of how we relate to our community and that we work with them. So I have a lot more other things to share, but I think I'm past my time.
Oh, that's all right, Julia. It's also interesting. And I really think that notion of the internal communication specialist that you came to that is so critical. You're right. I mean, sometimes we're pushing things out and the teachers are the last to know it, or other school staff. So I think that as we think about really this 360-degree approach to being part of a community and supporting students, that is so important. I mean, bus drivers, when we talk about the work school counselors do around student mental health, we're like, we must have the cafeteria staff and the custodial staff and the bus drivers and the coaches all involved in any kind of training we do, because you're right, bus drivers see these kiddos first thing in the morning and last thing in the day, and they often pick up on things that others wouldn't know about or see parents and families. I wonder if you could talk a little more about the community engagement center, is how that was developed, and is it a physical site, and who staffs it?
It is a physical site, and it's actually in the heart of one of our community where we have most of our non-English speaking families. So it's really wonderful. It is open to all of our families to come and engage with our division-wide liaison staff. It's where we have all of our training. We have bilingual liaisons in our schools as well. So they come there and they work with the division-wide liaisons. We have a face manager, a whole team, and it is a physical location at one of our schools, which is really nice because it's one of our newest schools. It's a really beautiful location, very inviting, has its own separate entrance, and it's very, decorated and very open for those families. We have everything translated in all the languages. As soon as you walk in, we have the word family translated into the many different languages. So we have had lots of positive response about that center. It's not very typical. Most of the family and community engagement work only happens at the school, and many times that work is done in the instructional team. And in my case, I'm very fortunate because that team reports to my office. And so we work in tandem with the FACE team, the communications team, and the community outreach team. So we're all sort of like working together to make sure that that we're communicating correctly with families in the various languages. How do we push it out? How do we make sure the messages are getting received? And how do they actually do the work of actually engaging families with their grassroots approaches? So it's a real wonderful relationship because those FACE members are part of our team, the whole school and community relations team.
Oh, that sounds so amazing. Thank you so much, Julia. And now we're going to turn to Kristi. And Kristi, I'd love to hear from your perspective. You're involved nationally with the National School Boards Association, but also you are on a school board in Salt Lake. So how are school board members and school boards really keeping kids and students at the center and focus, while at the same time, being good stewards of the community you serve and making sure you get their input as well?
Gosh, Jill, thanks so much. Anytime I would love to talk about the work of school boards. And maybe what I'll do is I'll start off by talking about two school districts that are doing great work around career and technical education and dropout prevention. So these programs are 2 of 18 programs that are going to be recognized as Magna Award winners, sponsored by NSBA's flagship magazine, the American School Board Journal. So the first one is Windsor Central School District. It's a small rural district located in Broome County, New York. And most of the students that live there are surrounded by farmland, but many of them don't understand the variety of careers that could be related to agriculture and how to pursue them. So the district has an agriculture pathway that exposes students to career exploration activities, starting in kindergarten and then up through middle school. Once they hit high school, then the students can enroll in a full year of courses about advanced agricultural topics. So that would be like environmental science, welding, veterinary science, and more. They also engage in work-related experiences to learn whether or not that career in agriculture would be something that they'd actually like to pursue. So at Windsor CSD, every school, which I think is so cool, has a garden and a greenhouse. While at the high school, they feature beehives, livestock, a barn, chicken coops, and more. So across from the high school is a 6.7 acre land lab that includes open fields for planting, a barn with produce washing stations, apple trees, blueberry bushes, and a tractor. So the students can earn their career and technical education credits, but they also give back to the district by growing crops for the food service operations. Isn't that cool? Sorry, we're going to get to hear my dog. in the background. Unexpected. The second district I want to talk about is Buffalo Public Schools, Our Story Project. It's an after-school and Saturday academy program that provides extended learning opportunities with a culturally responsive curriculum to high school students of color at risk of dropping out. The program was created in response to data that was gathered by the district, and that data attributed to this low graduation rate for students of color and students not seeing themselves represented in the curriculum, as well as a lack of access, right, to culturally relevant learning experiences. So within the program, high school students focus on diverse histories of communities and cultures they represent, including culturally relevant field trips, history lessons, diverse authors, and guest speakers. The students who have often felt marginalized in classrooms have found a safe place in this program. And it's really led to a social emotional growth and a commitment to their academics. The other part is that it's resulted in a greater than 13% increase in graduation rates for our African American students and our Latino students. So to wrap up, I mean, the representatives from these 3 grand prize winning districts will be presenting at NSBA's national conference in April, and all the winners are going to be highlighted in our school board journal, which will be set to publish on March 20th. And you can read that at nsba.org/ASBJ. By shining those spotlights on these programs, we hope to provide information, but also inspiration to other school districts being faced with similar challenges. The only last thing I'd like to add is that there were a lot of lessons learned for school board members during the pandemic. And I think one of them was that many of us never broadcast any of our meetings. And that became a necessity, to broadcast so that we were engaging with not only our families, but our students about the important things we were talking about. And the lesson learned was that we had so much engagement from our community that we've continued to broadcast. So that's been a good thing and a hard thing, but yet it was a really good lesson from the pandemic.
Oh, Kristi, thank you so much for sharing those examples from those Magna Award winners. I really appreciated hearing about the CTE project. I mean, we know there's so many opportunities available to students that they don't know about and that their families don't know about. And when you can make it real and bring it to them and they're doing the work and seeing the work, how amazing. I love me a good school garden, but gosh, you all, that was one step farther with barns and cows and chicken coops, but that's really quite amazing. So thank you for sharing that. And I really appreciated the example about the culturally relevant experiences as well, because we know that does impact students. So thank you, Kristi, for all you do nationally at NSBA and in your school district in Salt Lake. Really appreciate that. And I really want to thank all of our panelists who joined us today as we really talked about student academic development, their career development that we just heard about, and their social and emotional development as we work together as a community to lift up and support students and families and all the educators who make learning happen in a school and a school district. And on behalf of the Learning First Alliance and its member organizations, I would like to thank all our panelists and our wonderful audience through the webinar for joining us and participating. I do hope the insights and short stories shared have been valuable and reinforce your support for your local public schools and the many, many professionals who contribute to our schools and our kids' success. And really give a shout out to them and raise them up this week during Public School Week. And make sure to visit www.publicschoolproud.org for more information about how you can support your local schools and always be here for the kids. Thank you so much for joining us today.